There's a voice deep inside every dad calling him to lead. Society, vices, inner demons, negative thoughts try to dampen and drown out that voice, but it never goes away. Your wife feels it, your children feel it, and your heart and soul feel it too. It's the voice that starts off as a whisper, but then becomes a calling to be the tip of the spear for your family, a calling to play all out and lead by example for your children, a calling to build a legacy that will go on for generations, a calling to be the warrior dad you were born to be. Dads, our children need us now more than ever to be that beacon of hope, courage, positivity, and strength. It's time to rise as warrior dads together as a brotherhood. If you felt that twinge in your soul, it's time for the Warrior Dad Experience. Welcome to the show. I am extremely excited to have special guest Rebcca Rusch on the show. Rebcca, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. I think it's going to be such a unique conversation, right? Exploring the depth of a father's impact with you and your journey and your story. So let's start right there, right? I know the father dynamic was a little bit different for you growing up. So why don't you share the backstory? Obviously, I know it, but then we can kind of pull some strings in that story.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And this is a unique podcast for me to be on because I'm not a dad and I'm not even a parent, but I'm a daughter. And my dad had a really big impact on my life. Sort of unexpectedly. He was shot down in the Vietnam War in 1972 when I was just 3 years old. He was a weapons systems operator in the backseat of the F-4 Phantom aircraft. And he never came home from his service in Vietnam. And I was 3. My sister was 6. I have none of my own memories of my dad. And we grew up, single family household. My mom worked her butt off and was gone a lot. And my sister and I really had to develop a sense of independence and kind of take care of ourselves in a lot of ways. And so that was the family dynamic growing up. My sister and I both went on to, and my mom as well, super high achiever in the computer industry. My sister went on to become a 2-star general in the Air Force. I went on to become a multi-time world champion in sports. And it really wasn't growing up, people would say to me, oh, I'm so sorry you lost your father. That must be so hard. That must be, heartbreaking. And as a kid, I just kind of would just sort of like pass it off because I didn't have my own memories. And how do you miss or love or mourn something that you don't know? And, of course, I would hear stories from my grandmother and my grandpa, my father's side. I would spend time in the summers at their house where my dad grew up. And so I was getting this impact throughout my life in little dribs and drabs and hearing music. My mom would talk about music he listened to, but I didn't really understand, that I was learning about him or getting to know this person until much later, until 2015. I went and did the biggest ride of my life, the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And my sport, which is ultra endurance sports, lots of different things all over the place, but cycling most currently. And so I had an idea, just a little inkling to go ride the entire length of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and put together a big expedition. And that trail is, all I knew about it was that my dad was shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Okay. And so at age, 40 something, I started to have a real curiosity about wanting to try to connect with my father. And the only way I knew how to do it was to go ride my bike 1,200 miles and go to this map coordinate. I had a map coordinate. I love navigation. And so I kind of went to meet him in the way that I know how. And it was a month on the trail through Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. A really intense physical expedition, intense emotional expedition. and to go to the place where he died. And I didn't know what I expected to find. And the really amazing thing that I found was the beginning of a relationship with him, and
Okay.
getting to know him, and getting to know this man, and the place, standing in the ground, the place where he died, which maybe seems kind of morbid to people, and so many people, we did a film on it. It's called
Yep.
Blood Road, and that's the film that you watched. It won an
Mhm.
Emmy. But look, I went to do this expedition not to make a film. I went to do it for myself. This kid who just wanted to go explore and find her dad.
Mm.
And so many people after that journey said to me, "Oh, it must have been such great closure for you." And it was 100% the opposite. It was an opening for me of understanding why he was there, reading the letters that he wrote home, and the words that he wrote from serving and how he felt, and then meeting people who served with him of his generation, and becoming friends with some of, one of his best friends from college. He and I are really close now, and he helps me build a memory of that. And so it was this amazing opening, really, to get to know my dad. And I can look back now and know that the stories my grandmother were telling me, my mom, other people, I can start to piece that together. And now I can say I have a relationship with my father, and I'm 55 years old. He died when I was 3, and I feel really close to him. And I wanted to talk to you on this podcast about, you're inspiring dads to be the best person they can. And, my dad had a very short life, but what I know about him has had a massive impact on me as a person. And so, I think about nature versus nurture. And, I didn't grow up with him, but the
Mhm.
impact of him has been really quite profound now that I can look in the rearview mirror and go, "Oh, yeah, my grandfather taught me to fish in the same pond where he taught my dad to fish." And just feeling all the layers of connection. And so I don't feel the loss. I actually feel like I have a relationship with this man. And it's pretty great. So, I mean, for the dads that are with their kids, just knowing, no matter how long or short, you talk about, you have 18 years with your kid
Yep.
until when you live with them, and then they go off to school, but the impact is so much deeper than that, and they will carry the impact to their grave, and pass it on to their kids and their nieces and their family members. Um, so yeah, that is my story with my dad. But some of the impacts that I think are so important for parents to know is writing a letter. Like, that's one of the things we have from my dad, is the letters
Mm.
he wrote home from the Vietnam War, and he signed them all with the words "Be good."
Mhm.
And that's become my mantra and my
Right.
mission statement. We have a few of his songbooks that he wrote. He was a musician, and he meticulously wrote down the songs and the notes and the lyrics. And just looking at that, I can see the type of, disciplined person that he was, and knowing that he loved music. And so we impact people in so many ways that we don't think are a big deal. And I think often we want to be, the best person, best at our job, the best at working out, but you don't have to be the best. Those little tiny touch points of just being good really go quite a long way. And I know we're all striving to be perfection, but perfection doesn't exist.
Nope.
And obviously, my dad didn't want to leave, when I was 3. He would have liked to have a lot more impact and time with me, but just the way that he lived his life, when he was a young man, has motivated, inspired, and taught me, even now.
Right. Right. So let me pull some. I wrote down some questions. One is obviously chasing first, like for 30 years in your adventure sport journey. What's the trigger behind that? Right. I'd love to dive into that a little bit, and then dive into what was your trigger to go bike the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Was there some calling you felt of being closer? But let's start on the adventure athlete first, because I'm interested there.
Yeah, I mean, part of it goes back to our childhood of growing up, single family home and mom's at work, and my sister and I were kind of fending for ourselves. And, in junior high, high school, I was searching for a community. I was searching for belonging, like most of us. And so I ended up just a neighbor's suggestion. I joined the cross country running team,
Okay.
and I had no athletics in my family. There was no one who was sporty around me. But my neighbors just like, join the cross country running team. You get a free sweatsuit. And so literally that's what it was. And I walked on freshman year and went and joined the cross country running team. And what I found was a place I belonged. I
Okay.
found a sense of community. I
Yep.
found that, as a young teenage girl, that instead of sort of hating your body or being nervous about how you look or what you're wearing, learning that my body was strong and powerful and using it for something, that was kind of amazing. And so this was real new for me to run and explore and have people to run with. And that was very formative for me to join the cross country running team. Because like I said, I found a community, I found basically a teacher in nature and sport. And that theme of being movement and being outside has really carried through my entire life. And I didn't plan to be a professional athlete. I didn't have that. It just felt good to be
Mm.
outside moving with people. And that hasn't changed in 55 years. I've formed a career around that. So that led to, running in high school and then, or in college, and then getting a bike, and then taking up rock climbing and paddling and adventure racing and all this cool stuff that, I was just called to do out of passion because I liked
Mhm.
doing it. It turned out I was pretty good at this stuff. And
Mhm.
so I made a career out of it. And I found out later my dad really loved exploring too. He loved being
Okay.
outside. He lived out of his car for a while playing music with his best friend. They went and traveled around the US and like played in coffee shops. And I lived out of my car rock climbing for a while. So I found all this stuff out later. But nature and movement have always pulled to me. And I feel fortunate that I've been able to make a career out of it. And now, one of my big missions is the way that I parent other people or share my impact is getting people outside, getting people moving, especially with family members.
Yep.
It's the best way to connect. And there's so much science behind the neuroscience behind being outside,
Mhm.
moving. Those really are our magic pills for self confidence, for discipline, for community, for bonding with each other. So, yeah, I found sport at an early age. I never looked back. I've done a lot of different things, a lot of different sports, and sort of ultra endurance cycling is kind of now the thing. And, the impetus for riding the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I was really just being creative and trying to think of like what would be a cool adventure to do. Cause I do this
Okay.
all the time. Like, oh, there are people like, I want to go climb that mountain, or you see a hill outside, your local park. You're like, I wonder what that looks on the top, like on the top of the hill. I've always had that curiosity.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to design a really cool expedition. And really, it was a friend. I was like brainstorming on things I could do that nobody had ever done and trying to be creative. And really, a friend was like, you should go ride the Ho Chi Minh Trail, who knew my history. And then it was
Right.
like, of course, yeah, I need to go there. And I I really feel like my career development, it's really interesting how that has been the tool that allowed me to connect with my father
Mm.
and go find that place. And my sister, on the flip side, she connected to him through the military and through
Right.
31 years of service in the Air Force. And so we both found our path to sort of get to know our dad, and mine was through nature and sport. And it's interesting too, he had both those sides. He had the service side and he had the
Mhm.
explorer side, and loved to fish and loved animals and loved to, go play in the woods. And I know that from my grandparents, who would say, oh, you're like your dad in that way. And so it's pretty cool to be able to connect with him. But that was the impetus, was really just curiosity of, wanting to put context to who I was, who he was, and wanting to know more.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love the bonding through movement, through exercise, being out in nature. I think dads, as you're listening to that, I mean, there's nothing better than going for a hike with the kiddos as the family. I mean, that's such, when you move the body, you get out in nature, there's just, to your point, Rebecca, it is the magic pill, right? Getting out there. And those are experiences you're always going to remember as families, right? Not sitting on the couch on tech or, doing those sort of things. It's getting out and exploring a little bit, getting curious. So I love those pieces to it. The other thing you mentioned, and I didn't realize, the be good until, I saw your email and watched the film myself, but like the mantras and sayings
Yeah.
that dads can have that can impart. I mean, those are the things that kids remember. And I will say other kids remember too, being around their sphere of influence. So what were a couple things that you learned from your dad that really stuck with you, just to reinforce that kind of mantras and sayings point?
Yeah, well, it's one of the few things we have. We have the letters that he wrote home from the Vietnam War, and those are highlighted in the film. And every single letter he signed off with the words "Be good." And so, some takeaways when I went and rode the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and I went to connect with him and had a beautiful, amazing, intense adventure in the jungle. But I also, in one of his letters, he wrote about the remorse of dropping bombs on people and being in the war and not understanding what it was for or why it had to be done. And he expressed that. And I really felt that when I went and did the ride. One of the biggest discoveries for me was that there are still a ton of unexploded ordnance left from a war
Mhm.
that ended 50 years ago.
Yep.
Is the bombs are still in the ground, they're unexploded, and they're still killing and injuring local villagers in that area. And I really felt this strong sense. I had no idea
Yep.
that was there. And it's so prevalent when you go spend time, especially in Laos. It's the most bombed country in the history of our world, and they weren't at war. And so I felt like he was really strongly messaging me about his remorse and bringing me there so I could do something about it. And coming home from that ride, I felt that my cycling accolades, all that's my reach, my notoriety could be used for a lot more than just standing on another podium. And so I launched the Be Good Foundation in his name after I got back from that. To one, our initial project and sort of founders project is helping to clear unexploded ordnance along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But we also do other projects that include really, really using the bike as a healing mechanism, using the bike as an empowering mechanism, whether that's getting kids on bikes, whether that is, making the trails more accessible to more people. We do a lot of work with military and PTSD recovery through the
Mhm.
bike. And so really my dad gave me that gift of like, hey, these bombs are still here. You can do something about it. And I took his words, be good, and launched the foundation. And then I've also, when I think of the words be good, it's like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be excellent. You don't have to do everything right. You just have to be good. And so I take that in a lot of ways of one, being kind to myself, being good to
Mhm.
myself, but also everything I do has an aspect that is giving back to somebody else. And I know that he was like that. And so I do take that from him. I also take his love of music and traveling and curiosity and adventure. That's been a thread throughout my whole life. And then, one of the words that he said in his very last letter home, he wrote the words, and he's writing this to my mom, but he said, if anything should happen to me, please don't let me die, to Sharon and Becky. And so
Mm.
those words, my promise to him with the Be Good Foundation and my work, is that his memory is not dead. He's not dead to me. He's alive and well. And we work together basically on the Be Good mission and the work that I'm doing through the bike.
No, I love that. That really hits the heartstring. I wear a pink wristband on. I lost my mom a little over 9.5 years ago to breast cancer. And Rebecca, one of the last deep conversations I had with her was she was scared she'd be forgotten. And I
Yeah.
told her that that wouldn't happen. So, indirectly, she passed that baton to me, but it sounds like, hey, that was done through your dad's letter as well. And back to your point, talking about the movie, it was shocking how many unexploded ordinances were out there, and the, the holes everywhere of all the I just, to your point, I didn't know. I wasn't aware of that when I watched the film. So that was very eye opening. Love that you created the foundation and are tackling that, as well as you mentioned being kind to yourself. I think that is such a powerful message. I mean, for everyone, but we're obviously speaking to dad specifically, is be kind to yourself. And so many times we're like our harshest critic. We beat ourselves up, right? And I think that's so important to highlight, that be kind to yourself. And, would love, you have any actionable strategies that you use for yourself to give yourself grace or be kind to yourself on a daily basis that dads might be able to leverage and use themselves?
Yeah, I use this all the time in sport and in my life is, I talk to myself in the third person. I talk to
Okay.
myself as my dad would talk to me. Instead of me saying, "Oh, I suck. I shouldn't be doing this. I could be doing better." I turn it, and what would my dad say to me? Or if I was speaking to my niece or a friend or even a stranger, would I use that language on a total stranger? And the answer is no. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
use awful language on ourselves. And so when I find that negative voice in my head just sort of beating myself up, I flip it and I speak to my dad, or I speak to someone else, or I imagine he's speaking to me, of being like, what, Rebecca, you're doing the best you can. You're doing pretty well. Take a rest day. Tomorrow's a new day. Like, whatever you might say to somebody else. Use that language on yourself. And if you're a dad with a kid, would you ever use the language on your child that you use on yourself? And the answer is no. And so, you talk a lot about leading by example. So being kind to yourself, that's being an example of your kid, for your kid. You wouldn't want your kid to be beating themselves up the way that you are. And so even though it's an internal voice, change it. There's a lot of power behind changing your language, changing your perception, even if you don't totally believe it, even if you're sort of back of your head saying, yeah, but, just be like, no, you're doing a great job. You're doing the best you can. And, use the language that you would use on your own children, on yourself. And it's going to create a glow. It's going to create a confidence. It's going to create a kindness in yourself. Because quite honestly, being negative and beating yourself up, it doesn't give off the right vibe to anyone else around you. You're
Right.
going to give a negative vibe. People can tell when they walk in the room that you're pissed off. Like, we
Yep.
are so transparent with our nonverbal language, and we think we're hiding it. But if you have a dog, then the dog can tell when you walk into a room what your energy is. And so can your children, so can your spouse, so can everyone else around you. So that would be my actionable item, is to speak to yourself in the third person. If you're struggling to have a nice voice to yourself, speak as you would to a friend, to your kid, to your spouse, and use that language on yourself every day if you can.
Yeah, no, I love the speak to yourself like you would speak to your children, right? We wouldn't talk to our children that way, so we shouldn't be talking to ourselves that way. And the other piece is, if it feels awkward, feels uncomfortable, it's because you haven't done it yet, and that's okay.
Right.
You've got to practice it, and then the more you practice it, the better I'll get. And I'm a reformed, beat myself up kind of guy, and the more I've practiced becoming my biggest cheerleader, the more it feels authentic, the more it inspires me, the more it pushes you. So, lean into that uncomfortableness. That's just doing something different. So, I love that piece. And the other piece you said, energy. People feel like, you can feel when somebody walks into the room, and if they're ticked off or in an angry feeling,
Yeah.
it just brings everybody else down. And I'm such a huge fan of energy, because we feed off of each other, and especially from a family dynamic, and dads, like, be aware of your energy. If you come in the house and you're angry or upset or got this negative tone, it's all of a sudden going to be impacting your kids. It's going to be impacting your spouse. And, that's just a very important piece to be aware of, because we need to bring that positive energy if we want them to, be positive, be happy, happy kids.
It's so true. And, I think, as we're supposed to be the adult in the room, like we've got it all figured out or whatever. But I do want to say we're all lifelong students, and you're learning from your kids, you're learning from the people around you. And, I coach other athletes. A lot of times I have to remind myself to practice what I preach. And I go back and I look at, what do I tell people of like, be positive, be disciplined, the athlete operating system. Well, am I doing that? Okay, I'm going to check myself and sort of practice what I preach. So often we need to go back to our own lessons over and over and over and over again, and continually being a student. And, what did you communicate to your child last week, or your kid lost at a sporting event? What did you say to them? And can you use your own language back on yourself?
Yeah, no, so important. And I love how many times it's challenging to practice actually what you teach at times. I love it. My boys are 15 and 13. I'll tell them something. I won't think they're listening. Then like 3 months later, I'll do something that was in direct conflict, and they'll be like, remember you said this? And I was like, actually you were listening. That's pretty cool. But no, it's just that discipline to do it day in and day out.
I love that your kids bring it back onto you, because often we don't think people are absorbing what's
Right.
happening. And like I said with my dad, I'm absorbing stuff that he did,
Yeah.
before I was even born. He's,
Right.
how he lived his life is impacting me. And so, yeah, there's big impact that you won't know. You might be gone before you realize, and your kid acknowledges like, yeah, I learned that from my dad. And I learned stuff from my grandpa that he taught my dad. And so things get passed down in ways that we're so unaware of, and little tiny things. I mean, I would say, to the people out there, yeah, it's hard to be a parent and to be a leader and to, be a family member, but it's not that hard.
Right.
It doesn't have to be perfect. And when you need to walk away and take a break and go for a walk and alone and take 10 deep breaths, go do it,
Right.
so that you come back in a state, like you said, the right kind of energy that you want to project to the people around you. We've all got to take breaks and walk away from the situation for a minute and then come back. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I'll just continue on what you were saying. Legacy, right? You were
Mhm.
talking about your dad's letter. Like, don't let me be forgotten. My conversation with my mom, like, scared she be forgotten. Like, dads, you need to understand the legacy that you're writing that could go on for generations, and most likely will go on for generations. You are crafting that story right now, like today. And that's just so important to be aware of, and then intentionally step into, hey, what legacy do I want to create? It's so incredibly powerful. Rebcca, where can people find you? Where can people look you up? Would love for you to share it to the audience.
Yeah, all my website and socials are RebeccaRusch.com, RUSCH. And we do have a discount code and an invitation for any dads and kids and families who want to come to Rebecca's Private Idaho. I host a big bike ride event in Sun Valley, Idaho in September. We've got a code for you. There's all distances, all levels. So we'd love to have you come join and ride with us. We'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, you can find me on my website or social media. And then Blood Road is the name of the film, if anyone wants to go watch that. It's a great family film. It's appropriate to watch with your kids. And mostly it's been an honor to talk about my dad on this
Yeah.
podcast.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and being on the show.
Thank you. Be good.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Dare to be uncommon, love, lead, legacy, create a legendary day, and I'll talk to you soon.